Hi there, everybody, and welcome back. So we're at the end of our journey through World War One. For now, we're definitely going to cover World War One topics in the future. This is the last video from Epic History TV and their series on World War One, and we're in the last year of the war, and it's 1918. As I said, I'm going to put up a poll in our community tab. So go there, vote. Voting is important. I'm going to do this week and next week some of the patron suggestions and also some of the Discord suggestions because I have a backlog on videos on them. So I'm probably going to start with a new series starting next weekend. But okay, let's go to the last video on the topic of World War One. Epic History TV. do, 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 do.
1918. After 3.5 years of war, the Allies are in crisis. Russia has been rocked by revolution, and its new Bolshevik government has signed an armistice with the Central Powers. Thousands of German troops will be freed up to fight on the Western Front, where the carnage of trench warfare has already claimed more than 1 million lives. But Germany is also desperate. Britain's long naval blockade has led to shortages and social unrest at home. While America's entry into the war brings fresh manpower and vast resources to the Allied cause, Germany faces inevitable defeat unless it can win a quick victory on the Western Front.
Germany is starting at the home front. They're starting to get more and more pressure from the socialists and communists and social democrats to end the war. As they stated in the last video, the government actually wanted to sign a treaty, but the generals didn't want to sign a treaty. Die Kaiserschlacht.
US President Wilson announces his 14 points. They outline his vision for a post-war world, including an end to secret treaties, a reduction in the size of armed forces, self-determination for the people of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and an international organization to settle future disputes. But most European leaders dismiss his ideas as wishful thinking. At Brest-Litovsk, Bolshevik Russia signs a peace treaty with the Central Powers. Russia gives up vast amounts of territory in exchange for peace.
Yep.
500,000 German troops can now be redeployed from the east to the Western Front.
The most important part of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is that the Russians lose a lot of fertile land, especially Ukraine, and they had already during the war and prior to the war food shortages, but they are going to be even greater. Also with the 14 points, that's one of the major things that when you talk about the First World War, that is always mentioned in textbooks in Europe, in almost every country where you're at. Because one of the main things that eventually led to the First World War was definitely secret treaties between countries and then trying to outflank each other. And as you saw when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, it was just a domino effect where then Russia declared war on Austria-Hungary, and then Germany, because they're allied with Austria-Hungary, declared on Russia. Then it's just a domino effect. Those 14 points on their own, if we look what led to the First World War, they look logical. But as we know, they are not going to solve every problem in Europe, and we're going to have another world conflict.
The Hungarian Empire, Litovsk. Russia gives up vast amounts of territory in exchange for peace. 500,000 German troops can now be redeployed from the east to the Western Front, where German General Erich Ludendorff plans an all-out, last-ditch offensive to win the war. Ludendorff's spring offensive catches the Allies off guard. German stormtroopers using new infiltration tactics help to overwhelm the British Fifth Army, which is soon in full retreat. The German advance threatens to split the British and French armies, with disastrous consequences. So French General Ferdinand Foch is appointed Supreme Commander of Allied forces to coordinate strategy. Outside Amiens, British and Australian troops improvise a defence and finally halt the German advance. The German offensive switches to the north, targeting the Channel ports. But the British inflict heavy losses on the Germans and prevent a breakthrough.
German stormtroopers were a big thing when the Germans, employed them into their army, because all of the European armies, they had a structural, pyramid shaped chain of command, so you cannot do anything without the approval of the highest ranks. But when Germany started to implement the Sturmtruppen, they were smaller divisions of soldiers that could go more independently, and then they could quickly react to danger, just improvise on the battlefield on their own. So it was a big thing for the Germans to implement that way of warfare, the Sturmtruppen.
Above the trenches, the First Air War continues to escalate. Each side now has more than 3,000 aircraft in service on the Western Front. But by 1918, the Allies have won air superiority, thanks to greater resources.
Yeah, they're just producing more at that point.
On the 21st of April, Germany's most famous pilot,
the
Manfred
Red Baron
von Richthofen, the Red Baron, is shot down and killed near Amiens. With 80 victories, he's the war's highest-scoring ace, and is buried by the Allies with full military honours. Britain's new independent bombing force launches a daylight raid against Cologne. It marks the beginning of Britain's own strategic bombing campaign. On the ground,
When you always think about the Second World War, and now you can see it also in the First World War, the Allies started to bomb Köln. And then you're asking yourself, why was Köln always the target of bombardment for the Allies? And that's because the Ruhrgebiet, this part of Germany, in today's federal state called North Rhine-Westphalia, was at that point in time, and also, Western Germany, they were the most advanced and most industrialized. So, of course, the Allies, and of course, they were also nearer to the Allied bases. So it's a perfect target for the Allies, not only in the First World War, but also in the Second World War. But although Germany's resources were crippled with the naval blockade, they also wanted to cripple the production capabilities of Germany. So that's why they started to bombard Köln.
Own strategic bombing campaign. On the ground, Ludendorff's offensive switches south, targeting the French. German troops advance 30 miles, but are halted at the River Marne, just as fresh American divisions enter the line. The US 1st Division is the first to see combat at the Battle of Cantigny. 3 days later, the US 2nd Division wins victory at the Battle of Belleau Wood. By now, there are nearly 1 million American soldiers in France, with 10,000 more arriving every day. The fourth phase of the German offensive leads to a 9-mile advance, but is finally halted by a French counterattack. In Italy, Austria-Hungary launches an attack at Asiago and the Piave River to support Ludendorff's offensive in France. But it's repulsed with heavy losses, and morale amongst the Austro-Hungarian army collapses. British and French troops land at Murmansk in northern Russia. It's the beginning of Allied intervention in Russia's civil war, on the side of so-called white or anti-Bolshevik forces.
didn't also the Americans land somewhere in the east of Russia? Hit me up with information if you know it. Somewhere, I don't know, at Kamchatka or somewhere near Vladivostok. But let me know if you know more information about that.
On the Western Front, the Germans' final attack is defeated in the Second Battle of the Marne. Ludendorff's offensive has cost the Germans more than 600,000 casualties and has failed to make a decisive breakthrough. Germany's final gamble has failed. The Allies now go on the attack. At the Battle of Amiens, British, Australian, Canadian and French troops, supported by tanks and aircraft, advanced 7 miles in a single day. General Ludendorff calls the 8th of August the Black Day of the German army. German troops are exhausted, hungry and demoralized, and begin to surrender in their thousands. The Battle of Amiens begins the Allies' 100 Days offensive. Trench warfare is over. The Germans are in full retreat. In the Balkans, a new Allied offensive at Dobropolye breaks through Bulgarian positions. The overstretched Bulgarian army collapses, and 2 weeks later, Bulgaria signs an armistice.
Okay, so the first Central Power
East,
to be knocked out.
British-led forces defeat the Turks at the Battle of Megiddo, taking 25,000 prisoners. Allied troops soon occupy Damascus and Aleppo.
Yeah, it's going to be split between France and Great Britain. The territories.
Marshal Foch orders a general attack. British, French and American armies reach the Hindenburg Line, a line of reinforced German defences, and break through. Ludendorff informs the Kaiser that the military situation is hopeless and that Germany must seek an armistice. Germany sends a request to US President Woodrow Wilson, who in return demands German withdrawal from all occupied territory and the Kaiser's abdication. On the Italian front, the Allies deliver the final blow to Austria-Hungary at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. The Austro-Hungarian army disintegrates, and 300,000 prisoners are taken.
Wow.
With the Central Powers facing collapse, the Ottoman Empire signs an armistice with the Allies at Mudros. 4 days later, Austria-Hungary signs an armistice with the Allies at Villa Giusti. At Kiel, the German High Seas Fleet is ordered to make a suicidal attack on the British Navy, but instead it mutinies. Revolutions,
like in Russia,
spreads
the sailors.
through Germany. The Kaiser abdicates, and a German Republic is proclaimed. On the 11th of November 1918, a German delegation signs an armistice with the Allies inside Marshal Foch's railway carriage at Compiègne. It comes into force at 11 a.m., but fighting continues until the last moment. American Private Henry Gunter is killed, charging a German machine gun at 10:59. He is thought to be the last soldier killed during World War I.
Wow. Didn't know that. The last one to be killed in World War I was an American soldier.
3 days later, in
Didn't
East
know
Africa,
that. Really?
German General von Lettow-Vorbeck surrenders his army on the Chambezi River. For 4 years, he has tied down huge numbers of Allied troops, remaining undefeated while cut off from home. He is still considered one of history's greatest guerrilla leaders. The Paris Peace Conference opens at the Palace of Versailles, just outside the French capital. Delegates accept a proposal to create a League of Nations to settle future international disputes. The Versailles Treaty, signed in June, imposes harsh terms on Germany. Its military is restricted in size. It must pay war reparations to the Allies. It loses territory to its neighbours, and its colonies are seized by the victors.
And the most important territories that Germany is going to lose is Alsace-Lorraine to France, and this part of Prussian territory. Prior to the Second World War, as the NSDAP, so the Nazis, rose to power, they were of course always talking about reclaiming the land and of course abolishing the Treaty of Versailles and so on. But as the French rule over Alsace-Lorraine was so brutal that even some British newspapers were like, oh my god, because the French imposed practically a military occupation of that territory, where the Germans needed to pay war reparations to the French. And as the German inflation rose and, you know, like economic struggle and so on, and the Germans couldn't pay for it, the French soldiers there and the French state started to dismantle the whole industry there, so buildings and the whole industry there, and bring it inside of France as a way of payment, because the Germans couldn't pay in money.
Its colony.
So this territory, Alsace-Lorraine, and this part of Prussian territory was actually one of the bigger catalysts why the NSDAP was so successful in their propaganda, because they were saying, you know, like, we are going to get that territory back. We are going to incorporate it back to Germany.
These are seized by the victors. Germany must also accept responsibility for the war in a war guilt clause, a source of lasting resentment in Germany.
Yeah. They didn't even start the war. Technically, Austria-Hungary started the war with their declaration of war in Bad Ischl. I made a video on that. I'm gonna put a video link, whatever, here or here, so you can watch it. If you didn't watch it, I was there, and that's actually the official date of the beginning of the First World War. So technically, Austria-Hungary started the war, and they were also consequences for Austria-Hungary, because Austria-Hungary isn't going to remain Austria-Hungary after the First World War. So there were also great consequences for them.
Boundaries of Europe are redrawn. Poland re-emerges after 100 years of foreign rule, while Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and an enlarged Romania emerge from the ashes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yep.
The Ottoman Empire is dismantled.
Before we jump into the Middle East,
Romania emerged from the
I want to
ashes
talk
of the
about
Austro-Hungarian
the
Empire.
new states and new territories in Europe. Okay, so Poland starts to be independent again. Austria was established as the First Republic, and Südtirol, so South Tyrol, here this part of Italy, was taken from Austria and incorporated into Italy as part of a, you know, like, you were on the winning side, you're going to get that. The newly formed state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs was established without Serbia prior to that. It was a weak state without any army, politically weak, internationally weak, whatever. Italy starts to take on the land that they were promised in the secret treaties with the Allies, so they invade Istria, they take Istria, they are going to take some islands on the Dalmatian coast, But Croats, Slovenes, they want to join the Serbs as fast as possible because they're on the winning side. They have a standing army, they can defend the coast, and politically they could argue with their allies that the Italians shouldn't go any further. Greece also gains that. It went to Greece. Romania, as you can see, they gained Erde, Transylvania. They gained also this territory. The Treaty of Trianon is very often mentioned in Hungarian historiography, national songs, like as one of the biggest tragedies of their nation, where they lost so much territory. But the interesting thing about Poland is the Allies, now you're thinking like, okay, why did the Allies want to? They didn't want Germany to have those lands because they feared that Germany could eventually rise from the ashes again. And of course, they, as you saw, they intervened already in the Russian Revolution. They didn't want the Bolsheviks to take on power, so they were thinking, let's just create a buffer state between Germany and Russia, and instead of giving one side or the other the territory, let's just make a new state that's probably going to be on our side eventually one day. So yeah, let's go to the Middle East.
The Ottoman Empire is dismantled. New states, most under European control, are created in the Middle East. Here, as in Europe, the seeds of future conflict are sown. While in the Far East...
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say here. In the Middle East, they did a horrible job. It was a horrible job. And that's why we have conflicts also still today.
Future conflict are sown.
Yeah.
While in the Far East, former German possessions in China are handed to Japan, to China's outrage.
Yeah, because Japan was on the side of the Allies.
World War I claimed the lives of 9.5 million soldiers. 1 in 8 of those who fought. 21 million more were wounded. 7 million civilians also lost their lives. Huge areas of Europe were left devastated.
Belgium.
Old empires vanished.
Poor Belgium.
New states were born. Lives across the world were transformed. The world was never the same again. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and subscribe to the channel. And find out how you can help us make more videos at our Patreon page.
Okay, great video, great series. Definitely Epic History TV is one of the best channels on YouTube, definitely. Prior to the end of the First World War, the US didn't want to be involved in European wars, meddling in European affairs. They wanted, like Europe, the old continent, just keep your dirty business outside of our business. We can trade and everything, but just stay on your continent. Okay. But with Woodrow Wilson, the US starts to be more and more entangled, not only and after Woodrow Wilson. The US starts to be more and more involved in European politics, gets more and more involved in European politics, entangled. It goes vice versa. It's not only from the US to Europe, but it's also from Europe to the US, especially on the side of Great Britain, which wants to establish stronger relationships with the US after the First World War, because they noticed that the US was a major industrial power. The 14 points and the treaties of the First World War, although they tried to solve some ethnic tensions and tensions between different groups and states in Europe, I think the intentions were actually good. I mean, good. It's always the question, what's good, what's bad, what's good, what's evil. But the implementation was actually pretty bad, because let's just take, for an example, Germany. They got it pretty harsh. They lost a lot of their population and territory to other states. Okay, what do you expect? The Germans living inside of Germany, still living inside of Germany, they of course want to reclaim that land back. And also the Germans living now in those territories in other countries want eventually to rejoin Germany. The Treaty of Trianon, where Hungary lost a lot of territory. But as I said, I think the intentions were pure and good, but the implementation was pretty bad. So as we know, it led to the rise of fascism, Nazism, and every other form in Europe. So, yeah, hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for the ride. It was a great ride. I especially appreciate your comments, giving your inputs and thoughts on the video and on the topics. And yeah, until the next time, see ya.